So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Right, so we are now on Kitab al-Zakat. Okay, so this Kitab al-Zakat, this is a new topic now. And one of the things that we have to understand about fiqh in general is that each chapter, each abwab, they have their own dawabit. Right, so dawabit are those kind of like sort of localized, you can say, qawaid. So there's universal principles which we call the maxims, the qawaid, and then you have principles that are like unique to a certain chapter. So one of the things which a student should know when they're studying anything in fiqh is they need to understand the qawaid of the madhab, and they need to know the dawabit of each chapter as well. Like for example, we've seen in salat there's dawabit in there. One of the dawabit is you can't be ahead of the imam. That's like a dabita, or something like anything khurujun najasa. That's like a dabita that is. So zakat has its own as well. That's one thing. Second thing you have to understand is when you're studying like salat is quite easy because salat is to do with something you do on a daily basis. So because you know about the arkan, you know about the movements and all that, it's kind of easy to keep focus on what you're talking about. Zakat is a bit difficult because not everyone gives zakat, and then even if you do give zakat, there's certain like aspects of zakat that you might not never have to do. So for example, like zakat of camels and cows and goats and all those kind of types of amwal zakat. And there's also sort of like discussions in the chapter of zakat which are more to do with money than to do with the body, right? So this is why zakat can become a bit complicated. Generally, I find like when students study fiqh, ideally you should have hands-on practice with fiqh. When I mean hands-on practice, I mean you need to have like demonstrated fiqh, which can only happen if you live in a country where fiqh actually takes place. So for instance, like you pray salat, obviously, so that can be observed. Zakat is a bit different because you need to be with someone who collects zakat, a zakat collector. You need to work for the government, for example. Or for instance, like when it comes to the chapters of Hajj, you need to work around Hajj, you need to be in Makkah, you need to understand all the issues that people face over there in order for you to understand how the Hajj would work. Likewise, mu'amalat. And generally, I find students find zakat very hard to implement. So one is, for example, the understanding of zakat can be quite easy, like we're going to see inshallah. But the application, for example, how do you give zakat of shares in a company? How do you give zakat of pensions? How do you give zakat of business stock? Yeah, or anything, or like for example Bitcoin. Is there zakat on Bitcoin? No zakat on Bitcoin. How do you decide if there is going to be zakat or not on Bitcoin? And so this is why zakat becomes a bit complicated. Likewise, buyu is quite difficult for a lot of students as well. Not because buyu, the understanding the buyu is quite hard as well in the beginning. But then application of buyu, the masail of buyu is quite difficult as well for students. Because they're not used to all the terms and conditions and the words that are used. And then obviously hudud, and then wasiya and rahan, all these kind of things, they are separate, because then that becomes a totally different challenge for students. So anyway, hopefully inshallah one day we're going to finish the chapter Kitab of Hidayah, hopefully inshallah, and if we don't inshallah, then maybe our future generations will finish it inshallah. Kitab al-Zakat. So this is the chapter of zakat. So zakat means like there's like a linguistic meaning that zakat comes from. So that could mean zakah yazku, which means to grow. Some of them say that this is from zaka'a, not zakawa. Yeah, and some say no, it's actually fine. And then some say no, zakah yazku actually comes from to purify, to clean. And so there's lots of linguistic possible meanings of zakat, just like salat. Salat can have a lot of linguistic origins, yeah, and the original meaning they say is dua. However, it can come for 5 other meanings as well, like tahrikus salawain, movement of the two hips when a camel moves and its hips are moving. Or for example, like salat can mean rahmah as well, mercy. It can mean qira'ah as well, etc. So zakat has a linguistic meaning. However, as you guys know from usul, when you have a particular sort of like when you have a particular word, and then the Quran comes along, and then it gives you a new coating, gives you a new definition. Yeah, this is called naqal. Yeah, so naqal al-lugha. Yeah, so you have sometimes a word which is used in its original meaning, like for example, shajara. So when the Arabs say shajara and the Quran says shajara, it's talking about the same meaning. And sometimes that word actually shifts from the original usage to a new meaning. So for example, if you went before the revelation of the Quran and you said to someone salat, they would never imagine ruku and sujood and all that kind of, what we're familiar with. They would understand from that dua. But when the Quran came, the Quran gave it a new meaning. It created this new meaning for it. And also salat, when the Muslims say the word salat, the first meaning that comes to their head is what we call salat, prayer. Same goes with zakat as well. So zakat has original meaning, and then that lughawi meaning, and then it has a shar'an meaning, a shar'i meaning. So this, naqal shar'i, where the Sharia shifts the meaning. This is important for us to understand. This is why Shaykh Yusuf Banur rahimahullah in Ma'arif al-Sunan, he says that one of the most important things for a faqih is to understand, not only understand the linguistic meanings of the deen, of the Quran, Arabic language, but also to understand the shar'an usage of it as well. And so shar'an usage of it would be like we just said, what does zakat mean linguistically, and what does it mean according to Sharia? Because if someone just says, the Quran says aqimus salah, so I'm just going to make dua, atuz zakat, just purify yourself, they're going to say, well, I've done what the Quran said. We say, no, you haven't done what the Quran said. You've done what the language has said. The Quran has called salat a specific act of a ritual, and the Quran calls zakat a specific way of giving a certain amount of wealth, to the poor. So this is why it's very important to understand the. So Imam Sahib al-Hidayah does not really go into shar'an meanings. So if you, for example, like look in the commentaries, they'll list like 2 or 3 different possible shar'an meanings. What's the meaning of zakat? Ikhraju juz'in min al-mali, kada 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 kada, go on. Or it'll come out with some other definition. So it's important to understand the definition, because once you understand the definition, then you understand how it works. Anyway, he doesn't start with that. So kitab az-zakat. So az-zakatu wajibatun al-hurri al-aqili al-baligh al-muslimi. Now there's 7 conditions that have been mentioned here. Okay, but actually before I actually mention the 7, I think I should just mention some basic points about ibadat. So acts of worship in Islam, when we talk about acts of worship, there's 2 types of action that we have. Okay, we have, or you can say, there's 2 types of action. You have those actions which are normal human actions, like eating and drinking and walking and speaking and moving your hands around. Those are normal human actions there. And then number 2, you have what is known as ibadat. Ibadat are specific rituals that we're told to do by Allah, that there was no way for us to figure out how this was supposed to be done. That's what ibadah means. So this is why the English translation of worship is not really ibadah. So it's ibadah is something specific that we're given. Like, imagine Allah gave us something that we could not have received in this entire universe. This is called ibadah. So that's why ibadah is specific, it's limited. You can't invent your own ibadah. And the rule in usul is that ibadat are all considered to be haram, unless Allah tells you how to do it. Whereas everything in the dunya is halal unless Allah tells you it's haram. So that's the rule for ibadat. So ibadat basically is talking about this idea that whatever the Sharia has told us to do this in a specific manner, that's what we call ibadah. So for instance, things like I don't know, Is walking down the road ibadah? No, it's not ibadah. Is eating food ibadah? No, it's not ibadah. Is going to sleep ibadah? No, it's not ibadah. Can going to sleep ever be ibadah? No, it can never be ibadah. Yeah, because the Sharia has never ever told us to do this in a specific manner with conditions, so it can't be an ibadah. What it can be is a qurba. Yeah, so a qurba, qaf raba, qurba is something which is any act that you do in life that you do with a good intention becomes a qurba. So for example, entering a masjid, is entering a masjid ibadah? No, it's not. Yeah, so there's no reward in entering a mosque. There's no command from Allah with conditions to say to enter a mosque. So entering a mosque can't be ibadah. But if you enter a mosque with the intention to pray salat, that entering the mosque now becomes a qurba. Qurba means a means of getting close to Allah. Does everyone understand? And this is usually when I start teaching Hidayah, I talk about these things and students get a bit confused. Because usually you hear in talks that people say, all your life can become ibadah as long as you have the right intention. That's technically not true. Yeah, it's not true. What they actually mean is everything in your life can become rewarding if you have the right intention. But ibadah cannot become, you can't invent a new ibadah. The number of ibadat that we have in Islam are fixed. Because Allah's told us through the Prophet ﷺ, so you can't add any more. Yeah? So this is why that people get confused when they say things like, I don't know, what kind of things do people usually get confused with when they think it's ibadah? Like entering a masjid, holding a Quran. Is holding a Quran ibadah? Yeah, holding Quran is not ibadah. Yeah, reading a Quran is ibadah. Reading hadith, is it reading hadith ibadah? No, it's not ibadah. Yeah, it's not ibadah. Studying ilm, is studying ilm ibadah? No, it's not ibadah. Yeah, but it's a qurbah because you're doing something with the intention to get close to Allah. Does everyone understand that? So the way to recognize something as ibadah, if it has strict conditions that if you don't do it like this, it won't be accepted. So anything you can think about, think of anything and think, okay, if I don't do it with all conditions, it won't be accepted. Then that means that's an ibadah. Yeah, and everything else is not an ibadah. Okay, can this be where the Christians went astray by not using the intended meanings? Yeah, that's one of the things. The reason I mentioned the linguistic thing to you is because Hanafis are very specific on language. Yeah, they're very specific on, you can't add to the Quran, right? Because, by adding to the Quran, you're affecting the meaning, khas words in usul. So, that's why I mentioned that. But so the word, when the Sharia brings the word, the Sharia gives it a haqiqa, it gives it a new haqiqi meaning. It leaves the old haqiqi meaning into a new haqiqi meaning now. And yes, the Christians and these this is where they actually went astray. In fact, they say there's actually this group of people called the Qarra'iyun. Yeah, you can actually look them up. They're a Jewish group. They actually started off with this guy called Aaron Qarra'i, I don't know what his name was. And he was in prison with Abu Hanifa. You can Google this. I only found it on Wikipedia. And then with further investigation, I found this was actually documented in a lot of books. Abu Hanifa was with a Jewish prisoner. And Abu Hanifa explained to the Jewish prisoner about how he interprets the Sharia. That he only takes from the main source, the Quran. And then everything else, he has to conform with the Quran in order for you to take it. Yeah. So this guy actually revised the whole Jewish tradition, and they're known as the Karaites. I think it's spelled like Karites. You can Google this. And he basically went and he did that with his religion. In the past, teachers have said revision for madrasa exams is ibadah. Yeah, they mean it in a majaz way. Yeah, majaz. They don't mean it in a fiqhi way. And the reason it's important for us to understand what is ibadah from non-ibadah. Yeah. What is ibadah? So, for example, you hear people say, if you go to sleep with the intention of waking up in the morning for Fajr, your night is ibadah. That's wrong. From a fiqh point of view, it's wrong. It's not ibadah because ibadah is something which is specific. This is qurba. You call this qurba, and rewarding, right? Okay, so that's why zakat is an ibadah. Zakat is not tax. Like some people say, zakat is like a tax. It's not a tax because a tax is basically where the government stipulates a certain amount of money on a person's income, to support the government, to support the country. So we say that's not ibadah. That's a tax, that is a separate. So zakat is actually an ibadah which there's conditions for your zakat to be accepted and conditions for it not to be accepted. Whereas, other forms of charity, they are considered to be qurbah. Like if you went just randomly, pick someone off the street and said, come on, I'll take you for a meal. And you took them for a meal and you fed them. That's not an ibadah, that's a qurbah, that is. You get close to Allah through that. So your zakat won't be done through that. Have you got that? Okay. This is usually, mashallah, you guys have not kind of like got confused here, so that's a good sign. Usually when I explain this to students get a bit confused and I think this is like some strange stuff I'm teaching you guys. Okay, anyway, so Kitabu Zakat. So zakat is what we call Ibadah Maliyah. So Ibadah is divided into three categories. Ibadah Badaniyah, body Ibadah. Ibadah that's done with the means of the limbs. So your limbs perform the Ibadah. And then you got Ibadah Maliyah. So Maliyah is where you use mal to fulfill the Ibadah. And then you have Ibadah Maliyah wa Badaniyah. So those which has a mix, like Hajj. Yeah, Hajj is a mixture. So you have a bit of this and a bit of that. You spend a bit of money in Hajj, and you also, have to go to the location itself and perform rituals over there. So zakat is from the zakat amwal. And in usul, there is a rule in usul which is that whenever some sort of a hukum is attached to wealth, the ruling becomes easy. In other words, there's less sort of like strictness in there. Yeah, so it becomes easier. And this is why, like zakat, as you're going to see, zakat is not necessary on everyone, whereas salat, badaniyah, is necessary upon everyone. Yeah, there's more strictness in badaniyah on people, whereas in wealth, there's less strictness. And likewise in buyu, you'll see in buyu as well. And the other issue is this. So ibadat, they have a sabab, right? They have to have a sabab. They have to have a shart. Yeah, sabab, shart. Okay. And so, like for example, like salat. What's the cause? What's the cause for why we pray salat for? What's the cause? So you might say Allah, which of course Allah is a cause for everything in Islam. But what has Allah made the cause? So we say Allah has made the cause for salat. He's made it the, like if you kind of think about it, we should be worshipping Allah every second of the day because we're alive, we're breathing, Allah's ni'mas are being showered upon us non-stop. Yeah, so we should be worshipping Allah all throughout our lives. But that's going to be haraj, that is. So Allah limits the ibadat, the salat, to certain times. So what's the cause for this? The sun is. The movements of the sun. So we say the movements of the sun is the cause, the sabab for why you have to pray your fajr. And why you have to pray your dhuhr. And why you have to pray, yeah? So if you were, like now, do we have to pray fajr now if we're in the UK? No, we don't. Because the cause has not come in yet. The sabab has not come in yet. So the Hanafis say there is something which is known as the sabab al-wujub. Yeah, the cause for why that particular act has now become necessary on us. So for salat, it's obviously the sun. Yeah, the sun is the sabab. But you won't be sinful if you didn't do it. So when a sabab comes, you won't be sinful. You'll be sinful when the salat time ends and you haven't prayed. Because that's where wujubul ada appears. Wujubul ada is basically where you're obligated to perform it. You have to perform it. And that only happens, Hanafi said, that only happens when a command from Allah comes. Let's say, for example, someone's living on an island and they saw the sun move throughout the day and they didn't pray their fajr or zuhr or asr. Would they be sinful? We say no. Yeah. The cause for the salat is there, but because an instruction from Allah hadn't come to the people on the island, therefore they are not obliged to pray the salat. They're not sinful for missing the salat. Does everyone understand this? Yeah. So now when Allah in the Quran says aqimus salat, the aqimus salat applies in the last moments of the salat time. Remember, I explained a few lessons ago about the last moment, the importance of understanding the last moments. Similarly, zakat is something similar as well. So zakat applies, the sabab of zakat is wealth. You having wealth is the sabab of zakat. So when you have wealth, you're supposed to give from your wealth for the sake of Allah to the poor. Okay? But that obligation has sharts, sharait, and there's seven sharts that are mentioned. Yeah. So the 7 sharts for that obligation to become necessary on you, and then the khitab of Allah, the addressing of Allah, which is atu zakat. That's when you become sinful if you didn't do it. So let's say you're living on an island and the Quran hasn't reached you and you got loads of wealth and you never ever gave any charity in your life. Will you be sinful? No, you won't be sinful. Why won't you be sinful? Because the Hanafis would say no instruction from Allah has come to you to tell you to actually do that thing. So that's why the Hanafis say if there's a man living in Dar al-Harb, non-Muslim lands, where knowledge of Islam is extremely rare to find, and he accepts Islam over there, and let's say 10 years goes by and he hasn't prayed one salat and he hasn't given any zakat, anything, and then all of a sudden he comes to Muslim lands, that's when now everything's going to start for him 10 years later. Yeah, so everything that in the past 10 years he hasn't done, he's not obliged to do, right? Because the khitab didn't come to him. The instruction from Allah, there was no way for it to reach him. You understand? I apologize for going too much into this, but I need you to understand like the bigger picture of how Hanafi see things. Then all these things will start to fit in and you realize, okay, now I understand why everything has to come in. Do Hanafi determine the specific nature of ibadah from the root words like analogous to slave being not to my knowledge. No, not to my knowledge. I mean, what they consider to be ibadah, like, in the Quran where Allah mentions about ibadah, the word ibadah being used, they understand it to mean like something which instruction that comes from Allah. Yeah, it's an instruction that comes from Allah and it has certain like conditions attached to it. But yes, ibadah, abadah, the word verb is then like used for that. So that meaning is projected. The meaning of ibadah that we've understood now, it's like the lawgiver is basically telling human beings, right, you have to pray salat in this specific manner, and I'm going to tell my messenger to teach you guys how to do it. That's how we have to follow now. And this is how you're going to do it for zakat, and I'm going to tell my messenger this is how you're going to do it, and this is how you're going to fast. I'm going to tell my messenger how you can do it, right? And then that becomes the ibadah that we're expected to do. Yeah, it's like the kind of set of instructions, you can say. Okay. So Kitab al-Zakat. So now we've understood this. The last thing to understand in usul is that ibadat or instructions from Allah, every amr that comes from Allah, every instruction that comes from Allah is called an amr, right? A ma'mur. The Hanafis say, because the one who is giving the instruction is Allah, therefore Allah is Hakim. Allah is meaning He is the all-wise. And the all-wise would never ever instruct his creatures to do anything that doesn't make sense. He would never instruct us to do something that doesn't make sense. Or in fact, He would never instruct us to do something that's bad for us. Never ever, we believe. Yeah, He would always instruct us to do something. So therefore, like Aqimus Salat, it can't mean bad. Atu Zakat cannot mean bad. So this is why the Hanafis then developed this whole system of what they call Husn al-Ma'mur bihi. That every command that comes from the lawgiver, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has to be good for us. Whether we can see that goodness directly or whether we can see that goodness through something else. Like for instance, is believing in Allah good for us? We say, of course it is. Because we are thanking the one that created us. Makes sense? Okay, what about going for battle against an enemy, fighting an enemy? Are we instructed to fight the enemy if the time comes? We say, yeah, we are. We say, okay, if that's the case, but aren't you kind of dying in there? Aren't you giving up your life and your health and your wealth and your family? You go, yeah, you are. So isn't it bad for you? We say, well, if you look at it that way, yes, it's bad. But in the long run, it leads to the suppression of injustice. Yeah, the destruction of injustice. That's why it's good for us. Yeah. So sometimes it's direct and sometimes it's through a means. Yeah. So it's through a means. So we call it li'aynihi and lighayrihi. So again, this is something which, when it comes to, for example, like atu zakat, give zakat. So someone says, when you're giving your zakat, aren't you giving mal from your pocket to a poor person that you earned? You say, of course you are. Isn't that bad for you? Well, you go, well, you're actually supporting the poor person, aren't you? Yeah, you're helping someone. That's a good thing, isn't it? Yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah, and the only way that you can help a poor person is through your wealth. So therefore, it's good. So this is known as Hasan li'aynihi biwasita. They call it. They call it Hasan. Hasan al-Ma'mur bihi is divided in two categories: li'aynihi and li'ghayrihi. Li'ayni is two types: li'aynihi wada'an and li'aynihi biwasita. Right, and I've explained this more in usul. Okay, so now we've cleared all that up. Let's go back to this then. So there's 7 conditions for zakat being obligatory upon a person. To take any human being on earth, pick them up, and then if you apply these 7, if these 7 apply to this human being, then they have to give zakat. So what are the conditions? As zakatu wajibatun, zakat is necessary al hur, upon every free person. Right. So the reason it says free is because in society there's going to be free people and there's going to be slaves. So this was in the days when there used to be slaves. Slavery was quite, widespread. So people used to own other humans. Yeah. How do you own another human? Well, it's captives of war basically. So when countries used to go to war with each other and used to capture the enemy, you either imprison them, which is going to cost you a lot, or you make them into your slaves and you just buy and sell them like commodity, and they can be freed as well. So the hur is a person who is free, and every human being, this is according to Imam Dabusi, he says every human being has some basic rights. Yeah, every human being has some basic rights. One of those basic rights is you have the right to be free. Yeah, you have the right to be free. This is one of your basic rights. So because you have the right to be free, therefore you have the right to be able to make any decision for yourself. No one has the right to impose anything on you in the sense that control you. Yeah, obviously a government separate. So this is, we say this is wajibatun al hur, and therefore a slave, because a slave is controlled by someone else, right? The slave does not own a penny. Everything the slave has belongs to the master. So therefore zakat can never be necessary on a slave. Yeah, because he doesn't own anything himself. Yeah. So he's lost that right of ownership. Yeah, so he doesn't own. This is why also the Hanafis say that a free woman, a woman who is free, has the right to marry whoever she wants without anyone's consent. Yeah. So they say that the rationale behind that is a man and a woman have to be equal in the sight of Allah when it comes to the basic rights, the basic things in Islam, like salat and zakat and fasting and hajj. So that's why when it comes to salat, a woman prays her salat in the same conditions like a man prays the salat. And when it comes to buying and selling, a woman can buy and sell exactly as a man can buy and sell, right? No difference. And therefore she should have the right to marry herself off. So if she wants to marry a man, she doesn't have to go to her father and ask permission. So that's why Imam Abu Hanifa was attacked for this opinion, because they said, well, it goes against the hadith. Yeah, he said it goes against the hadith, but that's a separate issue, guys. But what we're saying is that the essence is that every human should have the right to be able to make their own decisions. Yeah. Okay. Aqil. Next is aqil. So aqil is a sane person. So sane basically means someone who has the ability to be able to, make difference between right and wrong. Yeah. So if you're able to discern between what is correct or what is incorrect, you're considered to be sane. Now, clearly, there is going to obviously be a range of people. Some people are not going to be sort of like, there's certain types of people who are, let's say, ma'tuh. So ma'tuh is someone who has like a childlike mind. Yeah, childlike mind. Yeah. There's going to be people who are very naive, very sort of like simpletons. There's going to be people who are like on and off majnoon, like maybe going through. So the fuqaha have discussed these kind of types of people. So you have al-junun arid or tari, which just occurs sometimes. Sometimes some people will be affected and they'll become majnoon for several days and they'll become okay after that. And then you have like a long-term majnoon, right, who's a person who suffers long-term insanity, out of capacity. So you have to be aqil basically, right? Because there's generally 3 things for taklif. There's 3 sort of like conditions the Hanafis mentioned for taklif. Freedom, you have to be free. Aqil, aql, right? Allah would never ever legislate. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah never legislates any legislation on someone who is not mukallaf. So therefore, aqil, right? So you have to have aql for taklif, because you have to understand the taklif. You have to understand the legislation, responsibility. Number two, you have to be baligh, because the baligh means adult. So therefore, a minor is not really fully like matured in their understanding, in their aql. So they might like understand how to buy and sell and things like that, but because they haven't reached this age. So what age do we state? Like, how do we draw the line and say, okay, this human being now is at a stage where now they can accept the taklif? So they use the age of bulugh. That's why there could be a child who's 9 years old, 8 years old, very intelligent, understands how things work. They can like literally run a business. They can run an institute. But we say the Sharia has drawn the line as bulugh. So bulugh is when, a male is able to impregnate a woman, or he's able to ejaculate, and the woman is able to have a baby, or she has menstruation. That's the kind of line they draw for bulugh, baligh. And then there's a Muslim, right? So a Muslim, obviously, is the one who believes in Allah. If you believe in Allah, then the ahkam. If you don't believe in Allah, so there's like a famous ikhtilaf between scholars. We know that the kafirs have to believe in Allah. They're obliged to believe in Allah. But are they obliged to carry out the legislations? So will they be punished for not praying salat and not fasting and not doing hajj or not? So one group of the Hanafis, they say, yes, they will be. And one group of Hanafis say, no, they won't be. Yeah? And this is like a long discussion again in usul. But generally, the position that's taken is that they won't be held accountable for except for iman, yeah, and everything else will be secondary in the akhirah. So you got to be Muslim basically. So zakat is not necessary on a non-Muslim. Yeah, non-Muslim living in a Muslim country does have tax, yeah, which we call the jizya. Yeah, so jizya is basically like a kind of tax only on adult males who are healthy. Basically, it's a tax for people who are potentially combatants. So someone who's potentially a combatant, like an adult, healthy male, like, so for example, let's say I was a non-Muslim and I was living in a Muslim country, I'd have to give jizya. How much is jizya? There's 3 levels of jizya. Yeah, so you have like the 12 dirham jizya, 12 dirhams a year you give. You have the 24 dirhams jizya, and you have the 48 dirhams of jizya. And this is based upon your financial status. Poor, medium, rich. Okay? And remember, it's only on men. So women don't give jizya, children don't give jizya, and disabled don't give jizya. Yeah? So the idea is, this is a way of getting your protection in a Muslim country. The Muslim government will protect you once you give this. So that's a separate issue. That's not Ibadah. That's a zakat. That's a total tax. إذا ملك نصابا ملكا تاما. So إذا ملك نصابا. So the person has to own a nisab, a threshold. So it's not just owning a penny or £10. You have to own a nisab. So nisab basically means a threshold of wealth. We're going to discuss 7 types of threshold of wealth. Okay. So there's a nisab for camels. Yeah. So if you have camels, there's a certain amount you have to have before you give zakat. There's one for cows, there's one for goats, there's one, some say for horses as well. There's ikhtilaf in that. And then there's one for gold, there's one for silver, and then there's one for business stock and for, if you count the horses, then there's 8. If you don't count the horses, then 7. And there's one for crops, yeah? So camels, cows, goats. If you count horses, then horses. If you don't, then gold, silver, business stock, yeah, inventory, and the last one is crops that you grow. Okay, this is known as the nisabs, the 7 or 8 nisabs that you have, thresholds. So you have to own a threshold. So you can't just have, like, if there's a graph, let's say this is the line on the graph for the threshold. If you're below the threshold, you don't give zakat. Then the next one, number 6. Milkan tamman, you have to have complete ownership of it. So what does complete ownership mean? So complete ownership basically means, let's say for example, I buy something off someone. and a camels or something, and I haven't received it yet, I haven't taken ownership of it yet, I haven't taken possession of it yet, so it's still like in transport, then I don't have to give zakat on it. Yeah. Or for example, like, someone, let's say someone has a job, you're a worker, you teach, yeah, tuition to kids, and parents owe you a lot of money, and they haven't given it to you yet. So as long as you haven't received it, you don't have to give zakat on it. You don't give zakat on it. Yeah. وَحَالَ عَلَيْهِ. So this is why, like now questions are going to come into your head, like things like, okay, so how does a pension work then? If you're not going to receive your pension until you're 65, do you have to give zakat on your pension or not? How does that work? Or for example, like let's say, you have shares in a business and you're not going to receive the dividends from that business. How does it work there? وَحَالَ عَلَيْهِ الْحَوْلُ. Yeah, and 1 year has passed. So here's the interesting part. So you don't really have this in ibadat. Normally in ibadat, you don't have like a long period of time before you have to do it. But because we said zakat to do with wealth, and then there's ease in wealth, so the Sharia has stipulated 1 year. Now you have to have that wealth for 1 year in order for you to give the zakat. And what do we mean by 1 year? What we mean by 1 year is not that you have to have that particular wealth for an entire year. We mean that as long as you at one point you hit the threshold in any of the 8 categories, you hit the threshold, 12 months, 12 lunar months down the line, you look, do you have wealth which is more than the threshold? As long as you have wealth more than the threshold, you give zakat. That's what the hawlan al-hawl means. Yeah. So in other words, you have threshold in 1st of Ramadan. Next year, 1st of Ramadan, your money that you have, your assets that you have, are they above the threshold or not? Are they above the threshold? If they are above the threshold, then you have to give zakat on whatever you have, even though in the middle of the year they would have fluctuated. Yeah. And that's basically how hawlan al-hawl works. Now, if the money goes below zero, so if your assets in any time in the year hit below zero, then there's an ikhtilaf there. Does your zakat still count or not? And we're going to talk about that later. Yes, it does. Yeah, but you have to. It doesn't count. You have to start a new threshold. Yeah, so you have to start a new date. So let's say, for example, on the 1st of Ramadan, I had more than the threshold. So my zakat year started. The timer, 12-month timer starts now. Tick, 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 tick. Halfway, 6 months down the line, I lost all my money. I was in the minus. So now, that timer stops now. Cancel the timer. The timer will restart again the next time you hit the threshold. So next time you hit threshold, now you're going to count 12 months after that. Okay? And then you're going to start from there. So that's basically what we call the hawlan al-hawl. And this is where we kind of differ with Shafis on this as well. Right? So we're going to talk about this in more detail, but I thought overall I'll just give you what these 7 things mean. So as people loan money to others, do they not have to pay zakat that money? So yes, they have to pay. So if you give someone a loan, do you own it? Yes, you own it, because that's why they're going to give you back. Milk and taman, do you have full ownership of it? Yes, you have full ownership. You've just given it to someone to use. So you don't have to have like full possession throughout the time for you to have to give zakat. Yeah. So if you've given money to someone, you call this a receivable. Yeah. So receivables are basically things that you are expected to get back. So receivables are divided into 2 types: qawi and da'if. Yeah, qawi and da'if. Strong receivables and weak receivables. Yeah. So for example, let's say a woman gets married and her husband says, I'm going to give you £10,000 of mahr. So that's a weak receivable. So therefore, if the man has not given the woman her mahr, and let's say 10 years goes by, and then after 10 years he gives her, she doesn't have to give zakat of the 10 years. So she's become the owner of the mahr, like she's owed mahr, but the mahr is not coming to her milk taman yet. So therefore, it's considered to be not necessarily upon her, it's upon him. He's got to give it. Okay. Amma al-wujubu, as for the obligation. So remember, Imam Qudoori is a bit, when he uses these terms, wajib, what does he mean by wajib? So this is where like Imam Hidayah says, the wujub here, what does he mean by wujub? He really means by wujub al-fard. He means obligation, because from a usul point of view, when you say the word fard, it's different from wajib, just like you've learned in usul. Because fard means something that is obligatory upon a person, yeah, something that is necessary upon a person through qat'i evidences, through categorical evidences. So if Allah instructs a person to do something, and the evidence for that is categorical, there's no shak or shubha or anything in there, then that is fard. If you deny that, you're out of Islam. Like for example, Allah tells us to pray salat. If someone says, I'm not going to pray salat, I don't believe salat is part of Islam, I don't believe it's part of Islam, that person will be out of Islam. Yeah. Why? Because this is fard. Yeah. And wajib, on the other hand, is something that you're instructed to do, but the daleel for that instruction, that daleel for it, is not at the highest level. Yeah. There's shubha in there. Fihi shubha. Yeah. So this is why if a person denies, for example, a person says, I don't believe praying witr is part of Islam. And you go, okay, then you're still a Muslim, but you're a deviant because you've gone against strong evidences. Yeah. So this is why Sahib al-Hidayah says what he means by wajib is fard. Yeah. What Imam Sahib al-Hidayah means by Qudoori means by wajib is fard. Yeah. Because clearly, if Imam Qudoori means by wajib the usuli meaning of wajib, then Imam Qudoori is essentially saying that, the evidence for why zakat is necessary, there's a bit of doubt in there. You can't say that because that's categorical Quran. Yeah. Alright, so anyway, az-zakatu wajibatun. So zakat is necessary upon. He says, amma al-wujub, as for the obligation of zakat, he says, the verse of the Quran, atu zakat. Atu is an amr, and amr comes for wujub, and amr is a khas word. Lafdhun wudi'a li ma'nan mufradin. And therefore, this is considered to be obligation. And zakat is a clear meaning. It's a khas word. Yeah, and so you have to do it. Yes, the word zakat is mujmal. So in usul, if you remember, in usul, there's a discussion of how obscure is a word. So there's 4 levels of obscurity: khafi, and then mushkil, mujmal, mutashabih. Yeah, khafi basically means is when, like, you read a newspaper and you come across a strange word you're not familiar with, but you read back and forth and you can kind of figure out what that word means. Yeah. So you like, for example, like whet your appetite. So you probably heard this statement, whet your appetite. What does whet mean? It's not W-E-T. It's actually W-H-E-T. Yeah, whet your appetite. So you kind of understand what it means. Whet appetite is from the word whet, which means to sharpen a blade. And it's like sharpening your appetite. And you go, okay, now I figured out. That's called a khafi, guys. Then if the obscurity is more than khafi, it requires further sort of like investigation, you call this mushkil. Like for example, let's say you go to your auntie or your uncle and you say to them, do you know what the word maful mutlaq means? Maful mutlaq. Yeah, they'll never know what maful mutlaq means, even if they think about it all day long. So the only way they can figure out is if they do research and they go to Google, type in, and and they'll find, maful mutlaq means such and such. That's called mushkil. So a word that is at that level which requires investigation, mushkil. Then a step higher than that in obscurity is when a word is impossible for a person to know without asking the person who said it. So like for example, if I say to you, a banana plus a orange equals 5. What does a banana equal? You'd never know. Banana plus an orange equals 5. What does a banana equal? Could equal 1, could equal 2, could equal 3, could equal 4. Yeah. So because you don't know what it means, this is called mujmal. The only way you can find out is if you come to me and say to me, okay, tell us what does an orange equal? We can work out what a banana equals. Or tell us what a banana equals. This is called mujmal. And then you have the last one, mutashabih, which is you can never ever know. Yeah. So let's say for example you find a guy died and he wrote on a piece of paper, a banana plus an orange equals 5. That guy's dead now. There's no way to find out what a banana equals. This is called mutashabih. So in the Quran, these 4 types of obscure words are used, right? So zakat comes under mujmal, third category. right? Because like we know that zakat means something more than just purifying yourself, but we don't know the exact details of it. So that's why it requires elaboration, and ahadith can be used to elaborate this. Yeah. So this is why he says atu zakat. Does everyone understand this discussion? I mean, I'm sure some of you guys are not familiar with the usul discussion that I just discussed to you. It's new to you guys. What I would highly recommend, if you really want, are serious about studying Hidayah, you really need to study usul fiqh. Like usul fiqh is very, very important to understand how like the scholars deal with dalail. It's basically like dalil. It's a science of dalils. Usul fiqh is science of dalils. You're just dealing with dalils, how to work one dalil with another dalil. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Okay. وَلِقَوْلِهِ, and this is from the hadith, أَدُّوا زَكَاةَ أَمْوَالِكُمْ. Yeah, so there's a long hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that, pray your salats and do this and do this, and whoever does this will go Jannah. Part of the hadith is, أَدُّوا زَكَاةَ أَمْوَالِكُمْ. Give the zakat of your wealth. Right? And then, so, the rule basically according to Hanafis is this. If you have something in the Quran, you can't use a hadith, which is khabar wahid, to add to that. Yeah, because anything that's in the Quran cannot be added to, if it's a khas word, if it means something specific. Otherwise, the Quran is going to be left open to all interpretations. Yeah, because someone can come along, like sometimes Quranis do this and say, I think zakat means, just be good to people. Yeah, purify intentions, or I don't know what they come out with. And so you're going to say, well, what's your reason for it? They're going to go, well, the word zakat, the Arabs have used it like this, and this is how I interpret it. Yeah, so this is why the Hanafis are quite strict. But if a word is mujmal, you can use khabar wahid to detail it. It can be detailed with khabar wahid. Yeah. So that's why he's brought this other hadith. وَعَلَيْهِ إِجْمَعُ الْأُمَّةِ, and on top of all that, there's a unanimous agreement of all the scholars, Sahaba and Tabi'in, of that zakat is obligatory. Yeah. In fact, even when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he became the Khalifa, the first thing that he did was he went and he sent an army to those villages who refused to give zakat to the government. Yeah, and that shows that zakat and salat were considered to be at the same level. Yeah, so alayhi ijma' al-ummah. So ijma' is a very important thing. It's a very long discussion, ijma' is, but ijma' actually is like the whole like gelling agent that gives the Sharia its structure. If you take away ijma', it's like taking away all the cement from the bricks in your house. Yeah, take away all the cement, the bricks would just fall apart and people would restructure them in whatever shape they wanted. Then he says, وَالْمُرَادُ بِالْوَاجِبِ, what's meant by wajib? Al-fard. And I told you. Yeah, what's meant by wajib, in other words, what's meant by Imam Qudoori bringing the word wajib? Why didn't he say zakat fard? He goes, because sometimes he uses the word wajib, but he means fard. Why is this? Why do we have to interpret wajib as fard? لِأَنَّهُ لَا شُبْهَةَ فِيهِ. Because there's no shubha, there is no speculation in the evidence for why zakat is necessary on us. Because it's in the Quran, so that's qat'iyu thubut, and the meaning is quite clear. Qat'iyu dalala, yeah? Because even though the word's mujmal, but there's so much evidences to clarify what zakat means. So la shubhata fihi. Okay, why is being free a condition? Ishtiratul hurriya, the condition of being free. Why? لأن كمال الملك بها, because complete ownership can only occur with being free. Why? Because if you're slave, you don't have complete ownership. Yeah, so that's the argument they use. وَالْعَقْلُ وَالْبُلُوغ, and this is why, like for example, the slave woman, just like those of you guys who have done the first part of Hidayah with me, we talked about the slave woman. What does she have to cover up when she prays salat? So we said the slave woman is treated like a man, in the sense that she only has to cover up below her breasts to her knees. As long as those parts are covered, she can pray salat with her breasts out, with her shoulders exposed, hair open, with her shins showing. She's allowed to pray like that. In fact, she's allowed to go outside the house like that. Yeah, just like a man is, as long as he's got his aura covered, yeah, between his navel and knees, he can go out, and she just has to cover a bit higher up. So the rulings of a slave are different, slave women are different as well. So that's why we have to understand, when we're studying fiqh, we have to understand there was a difference in fiqh. Fiqh was different for slaves in many areas than free people. Yeah. Wal aql, and likewise sanity. Yeah, so being sane. Wal bulugh lima nadhkuruhu. We're going to mention these later on. Yeah, because this has got to do with the Shafi's ikhtilaf on, does a person who's mentally unwell and they've got wealth, do they have to give zakat? Meaning, do their guardians have to give it from their wealth? And likewise, a child. So there's a ikhtilaf that's going to come later. Well, Islam, and likewise being Muslim, is a condition. Why? Because لأن zakat ibadah, like we said, zakat is a divine instruction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that has conditions with it, and it's ibadah. ولا تتحقق الإبادة من الكافر, and ibadah cannot occur from a kafir. Why can't ibadah occur from a kafir? Simply because ibadah is to do with the belief that Allah is going to reward you in the hereafter. Yeah, and a kafir doesn't believe in that. So therefore, the kafir does not deserve the ibadah. So even if a kafir was to pray, like you taught a kafir how to pray salat, Allahu Akbar, he could read Quran, he could do ruku and sujood and all sorts. In fact, there was actually a guy, in London, I think it was London, somewhere around London. And he goes, basically the imam was a Qadiani. Yeah. And they didn't know. And later on, people found out that he's a Qadiani, left. Yeah, so Qadianis are non-Muslims. So they can't do it, even if they do ibadah and it looks like they're doing ibadah and they do everything that comes with it, they won't get the akhirah reward. So if they don't get akhirah reward, it can't be classed as ibadah, because ibadah can only be done when you believe in Allah. وَلَا بُدَّ مِن مِلْكِ مِقْدَارِ النِّصَابِ, and likewise, لَا بُدَّ means لَا فِرَارَ, there's no escape. Yeah, there's no fleeing. Min milki, from owning the amount of threshold nisab. And I told you the 8 types of thresholds. لأنه, why do we have this threshold? Where do we get the threshold from? Why do we say that you need 5 camels? Or why do we say you need 30 cows or 40 goats? Or you need 20 mithqal of gold or 200 dirhams? Where do we get these figures from? So these figures are what we call umur tawqifiyah. Yeah, umur tawqifiyah. We'll talk about them when we talk more about the nisab. Yeah, so these are umur tawqifiyah, means something which has been told to us by Allah, the lawgiver, and we have no way of any sort of like human interjection. So we have no way of like fathoming this in our own mind, formulating in our own mind. So these numbers of why you give 2.5%, why is it 2.5%? Why can't we say, okay, in today's times, there's a lot of poor people, let's increase that amount. So there's a lot of people that can pay more than that. Let's increase it to 5%. Let's increase it to 10%. Right? Why can't we do that? Because umur tawqifiyah, umur ta'abbudiyah in Qudoori, is the word for it. Yeah, ritualistic instructions. Ritualistic means that we can't figure out the reasoning behind it. So like 5 salats, 7 times tawaf around the Kaaba. So he says, these kind of things, they are from qaddara as-sabab bihi. The Prophet ﷺ, he had specified the cause for it. Yeah, qaddara as-sabab bihi. Yeah, so the sabab is the cause. What's the cause for zakat? Mal. And he specified the measure of mal. That's why we said, remember, the rulings of zakat only apply if you have a certain amount of mal. So it's not just there's a poor person who's got a £10 note in his pocket and he's had it for 1 year. Does he have to give zakat? We said no, because he has to have had mal that has conditions with it. And one of those conditions is he has to have had it with a threshold. So that's the sabab. That's what it means. وَلَا بُدَّ مِنَ الْحَوْلِ. And so what about a year then? Why do you need a year? Let's say someone has, just earned £10,000. Yeah, they've sold their car and they've got £10,000 for their car. Why don't we give zakat straight away? Like, why don't people give zakat as soon as they hit the threshold? So we say we need a year because mal, the way mal works, mal is a bit strange. So zakat is only necessary on 3 types of wealth. And all 3 types of wealth, they come under like one umbrella called nama. Nama means productive. The wealth has to be productive. So what defines productive wealth? So 3 things define productive wealth. Wealth that is intrinsically considered to be productive. like gold and silver, is intrinsically productive, or wealth that is considered to be um, like naturally grazing, so it applies to camels and all the livestock, yeah, intrinsically grazing, yeah, because these animals, they give birth and all that. And then the third one is something which is legally productive. Legally productive is like business stock. So you could have business stock, and that business stock could, obviously, you could sell it, so therefore you could make profit from it. So this is why these three types of these 8 things come under these 3 things: intrinsic, and it's self-grazing, and legal, legal productivity. That's why it says la budda, it's necessary, min muddatin, for a duration of time, and 1 year seems sufficient. يتحقق فيها النماء, in which productivity can be seen. Why is it 1 year? Yeah, like we said, because 1 year you have all the seasons, and then all these seasons, as they go on, right, your wealth sort of like fluctuates. Yeah, so let's say, for example, I sell my car and I make £10,000. Okay, I've got £10,000 now, but that £10,000 might get spent on bills, on I don't know, on clothes, food, shopping. I have to buy another car. So all that money can actually get spent. So it wouldn't make sense. It seems as though very sort of like unfair. It'd be extremely very unfair that every time you made a certain amount of money, you have to give to the poor. Yeah, because then you'd be left with a small amount. Does that make sense? So that's why the Sharia gives a year. Yes, that's why it says La Budda, there has to be a period of time in which يتحقق فيها النماء, that productivity can be seen. Whether that productivity is like the gold, silver, which is in self-grazing, or وقدرها الشرع, and the Sharia has specified this with a year. Yeah, where do we get the year from? The Prophet ﷺ said, لا زكاة في مال حتى يحول عليه الحول. There's no zakat in wealth until 1 year passes. And what's the rational argument for this? لأنه الممكن به من الاستنماء, because 1 year, it gives, mumakkin means to give ability. It gives the ability for productivity. So if you're a businessman, a year is a good amount of time for you to be able to make money. Yeah. لاشتماله, because it consists of fusul al-mukhtalifa, different seasons. Like sometimes some businessmen will make lots, let's say in summer. Like let's say you're a what do you call it, travel agent. Travel agents are going to do well, peak time this is. So they're going to make a lot of their money then. They might not make that much money in school time. Yeah. And then sometimes you might have people who want to buy bikes. So people who want to buy bikes usually buy bikes from between March to August. That's the window for buying bikes. That's where they make most of their money. Then the rest of the year might be quiet. So the same thing happens, with all sorts of businesses. So this is why they say, because it consists of various seasons and different products might sell better in different times, a year seems satisfactory. والغالب, and mostly تتفاوت الأسعار فيها. Yeah, so the as'ar, the prices of things shift. So you got peak time prices, and you got low prices. So فأدير الحكم عليه. So the ruling, so the legal ruling. Now, because, like for example, let's say someone says to you, okay, but why don't we just say then, for a businessman who's a travel agent, we're going to collect his zakat after, in the end of August, for example, when peak time goes down. And let's say, like wedding season, someone who, I don't know, hires out venues for weddings or caterers for weddings, we're going to say, okay, we're going to look at the wedding seasons, and every time a wedding season comes, that's when you have to give your zakat. Yeah. So this is why he says, udir al-hukum. So now, instead of us having to kind of be very, very particular and find exact times and everything on the graph and look at the peaks and troughs and say, okay, this is when you have to give your zakat, this is when you have to give your zakat. It just makes it easier that we take this and we replace it with year. Yeah. So this is known as iqamatul al-sabab bil-musabbab. Like for instance, you've probably seen this in traveling. So, like for example, what's the reason for why we reduce our salats on a journey? Because of mashaqqa, hardship. But hardship is something difficult to detect. Like if you left it to everyone and said, right, if you feel this journey is hard, pray 2 rakats of Zuhr. That person will be in two minds. But so the Sharia comes in and takes away that and replaces it with 3 days journey, which now many scholars say, we talked about this before and we said the weak opinion is 48 miles. So now it's replaced with 48 miles now. So every time you go on a 48-mile journey, right now you reduce your salat now. So that 48 miles has taken the place of mashaqqa. So over here as well, instead of looking at all these shifting prices, we replace all of that with just 1 year now. Yeah. So even if someone knows most of my money I make in this period of time, that doesn't matter. We're still going to look at the whole 360. Yeah, 360 days. Udir al-hukm alayhi. Okay, we'll stop there. Yeah, sorry, I'm gone over time now. But there's a lot of, because it's a new topic, and I thought there's a lot of things that I have to expose you to in order for you guys, everyone, to be on the same page when I do further discussions, inshallah. If you have any questions, put in the comments. Let me just go over the summary of this again. So Kitab al-Zakat, we talk about zakat is an ibadah, it's an ibadah maliyah, and as it's an ibadah maliyah, it requires conditions, the sharait for it. Yeah. So the 7 sharts. What are the 7 sharts? You got to be free, sane, adult, Muslim. You have to own a threshold out of the 8 thresholds. The ownership has to be like complete ownership, and a year has to pass. Yeah. Why is this considered to be obligatory? Because we said the Quran mentions it, but the Quran mentions it mujmal, and the hadith have elaborated on the ijma has been done. That's why we said that anyone who denies this will be out of the fold of Islam. And what Imam Qudoori means by wajib, he really means fard, because there is no doubt in the evidence, so we can't call it wajib. Yeah. And why does a person have to be free? Well, because slavery is actually where a person's ownership, right of ownership, is diminished. So freedom is tantamount to complete ownership. And then sanity and adulthood, all these things are going to come later. Why do you have to be a Muslim for? Simply because zakat is an ibadah, and that's why zakat has to be upon those people who believe in Allah and the hereafter. Yeah, and a kafir can't do that. And then we said, what about the nisab? Yeah. Why do we get the nisab from? We get the nisab because the Sharia has told us this. The Prophet ﷺ told us this. He's as an extension, the lawgiver. So therefore, it's Amar Ta'abudi. And what about the year passing by? So we said the argument for the year is, technically you don't need a year, because wealth is only zakatable if it's productive, nama, if there's that growth in there. And we said this is 3 types of wealth. And we said this productivity can shift in the year, it can fluctuate. So to make it easier for people to observe productivity, the Sharia has given a 1-year window in which at the end of that year, whatever you have, right, you give zakat on that. Okay, any questions? Alhamdulillah, inshallah we can understand it. But obviously, I can only do these lessons when my holidays come. So, inshallah, we'll see when it finishes, inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Khalda. Could Mufti please clarify on the types of martyrs in Ujuz Masalik? I queried. Oh yeah, okay. Your question. If a person has not got a mental capacity enough, can we pay their zakat from their wealth? No, then there's no zakat on them. There is no zakat on their wealth at all.